Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of The Mind Boggles. On today's show, some people hear music in their head, so they write it down and they turn it into a song. Others hear music in dreams, like, for instance, Paul McCartney famously did with the legendary Yesterday. But one man is approaching musical performance in a different way, using his actual brain waves to make sound that others can hear during his performances. We talked to native Iowan multidisciplinary artist Jason Snell about the music of his brain on today's episode of The Mind Boggles. Thank you for tuning into the show, everybody. I'm Greg Woods. After the last several weeks of preparing for the BrainWorks conference and really delving into a lot of Alzheimer's-related topics, I thought it might be a little refreshing for us to take a step back today and look at the brain differently. And I do mean differently. As I'm sure you're aware, and things that we've talked about on this show have hopefully proven this as well, but our brains have a special relationship with music. It metaphorically kind of stirs our souls, if you will. But why is that? Well, whether it's studying music therapy or listening to savants that can play complex melodies after hearing a song just once, it's obvious that music and our brain have this really complex interplay. But usually that relationship goes a certain direction. We use our brain, for instance, to hear music. Then we translate that either through motion if we're playing the instrument right away, or we put that into writing, like when you're composing a song. But today's guest goes about composing music in a slightly different way. Rather than just using his brain to translate that music to paper or an instrument, multidisciplinary artist Jason Snell actually creates music directly from the sounds of his brain waves. A native Iowan, Jason is redefining how we use our brain in a musical setting, and he's learning a lot about his brain in the process. He's created new sounds using new methods. He's scored films and performed all around the world. He's even received an official selection for musical score at the legendary Sundance Film Festival, and he joins us this morning. Jason, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Your music is absolutely fascinating to hear, and we'll play a snippet of it a little bit later on. But in a world where people are, I think, always looking for the newest sound or something different, I can't really think of many examples of music that are produced this way. So in the beginning, what first got you interested in the brain?
Well, I stumbled across a tool that allowed me to do it. So I found a commercially available EEG. And some of my prior work in art and music was working with dancers and motion sensors. So I built a motion sensor system that allowed dancers to compose with their movement. And it was based on motion sensors conveying that motion data over Bluetooth to an iPhone app I created, which would then translate that motion data into musical decisions. And once I found the EEG, I realized instead of using motion sensors, I could use my brain as the input in order to start composing music. So that was the start of it, was finding the tool that allowed me to read my brain's electricity.
So this had to carry kind of an underlying knowledge of how to do some of this programming. So I guess even to go back further than that, you got started kind of in this technological realm, in this electrical realm. How did you kind of start down this pathway then?
In terms of tech in general, I had a Tandy computer when I was 13 and started programming then, and have always had a thread throughout my life where I've done computer programming. And then in parallel, since my late teens, I've worked on music. And those two worlds didn't really intersect for many years until recently. And to be able to use my programming ability in order to create an environment, and then to use my musical interests and talents to fill that environment with content.
So when you first looked at some of this technology, how much of it was kind of directly plug into what you want to do? How much did you have to adapt it to go from the dance side of things and with the connections to music and movement and Bluetooth and all that to brainwaves?
Well, once I got the EEG, I was able to get the actual data, so it'd be alpha, beta, delta, gamma, and theta waves. And then the real creative question is what to do with that data. So getting those different waves, each of them are at different frequencies, and at any given moment, like right now as I'm talking to you, my beta might be high as I'm working through words and talking. And so each of those waves are going to be at a certain volume or a certain decibel level at any given moment. And so I get the information about those 5 waves continuously. And with that data, I make musical decisions. And that's the part that's really the core of the invention, is what to do with the data and how to translate brain data into something that comes out as a music composition.
So going back to music especially, that's something that usually people start really, really early in life. Is that something that came naturally to you, or did you have to kind of hone that over time?
I didn't have access to the type of music instruments that I really excel at. So, growing up, there was band or choir. I never gravitated towards those instruments. But when I was 19, I was able to find a used drum machine at a local guitar store. And there was something about rhythms and producing music electronically that really clicked with me. And it went from, starting with the drum machine and then buying synthesizers, samplers, sequencers, and building a studio that's based on electronic music. And one of the pros and cons of it is that electronic music is often solo, so I don't need to have bandmates, in a consistent way in order to produce music over the years. The con of that is then I do lose some of the creative influence of working with other people on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. But for me, it worked out well in terms of getting into these instruments and then just, clocking in the hours of making music. And in terms of the brain, one of the things that is interesting with music production is when I'm working on music, I'm not thinking any verbal words for hours. It's this really special time for me where normally through the day I'm thinking about things or, having a mock conversation with someone I may see later or, trying to process through a conflict. With music, my brain goes totally nonverbal, completely engaged, and completely active for hours on end.
You hear about these artists that say that doing their art kind of translates them into a zone like that, and certainly there's been a lot of research into that, almost not really a Zen state, but a flow state, if you will, where it just kind of comes easily, and it sounds like that is a perfect way for you to reach that state is through your music, and you're just able to kind of turn that off. I imagine that helps the creative process quite a bit when you're not even remotely thinking verbally, you're just kind of letting your brain do the work.
Exactly. And it's something I experience uniquely with music. I also do visual art, and it's not something I experience with visual art. There's something about music that it's a different set of brain waves. And now that I've done this EEG work, I see what it is, and it raises my alpha. And alpha is also associated with meditation and meditative states. And so when I'm working on music, my alpha goes up, and there's this really interesting phenomena that happens where I'll be working on a piece and I start to hear in my mind what the next part will be that's supposed to be added to the piece. And then I go through my equipment and I find what will make that. And it's this really intuitive process. I don't know where those sounds come from, but I do know, when using the EEG, what it comes from somewhere in the alpha state.
I want to get back to your equipment in just a second, but for those who aren't familiar, walk them through kind of the alpha and the beta waves and the gamma and all the different brain waves that you're dealing with.
Sure. So the data I get off of this EEG, it's called the Muse, M-U-S-E. It's sold as a aid for meditation, but it has an open programming language that allows developers, if they have the skills, to be able to program their own applications to receive the data from the EEG. And from the data I get from this EEG, what I've noticed is that my delta reading seems to be higher when I'm doing critical thinking, or if I'm stressed out, or if when I've done performances with this, my delta is pretty high because, a bunch of people are watching me. Alpha waves are more associated with music. And so this interesting biofeedback loop happens when I listen to the music that's being produced live from the EEG system. My alpha goes up. And then when my alpha goes up, that impacts the music. So it's just something I do when my alpha is higher is I make the music more bass oriented, more dreamy. So it feels like I'm, creatively making an aesthetic that feels more like a subconscious state.
Wow.
Theta waves, I'm still trying to figure out what's triggering those exactly. Sometimes when I do physical movement or think about doing physical movement, which is interesting with the brain, those two seem to be identical. Sometimes my theta goes up. My theta is very high during performances, and it's lower when I'm doing the work in the studio, and I'm still trying to figure out what the theta does. Beta seems to be associated with talking, using my voice. And gamma, I haven't been able to get it to do much with this particular EEG. It kind of bounces along the bottom and kind of does its own thing, but it doesn't have enough variation. And variation is what I need in order to make musical movements and musical choices. So the three that I've been focusing on the most in terms of priority are delta, alpha, and then theta. Those are the three that are moving the most, and movement is what I need in order to make music. Because if it were static, it wouldn't be musical.
That's true. So how much of this knowledge did you have coming into this project versus how much did you have to research? And then when you were researching it, did some of this kind of click into place when you were reading about the different brain states and saying, oh, that makes sense, that corresponds to this in music? Or did you know some of that ahead of time?
I actually did not know it ahead of time. All my previous work wasn't focused on the brain. And so it's been this ping pong between doing tests and composing live with the EEG and then watching the readouts, and then, jumping over to research and reading what other people have said about the different waves. And to be honest, with this actual device, I don't know if all the waves are labeled correctly, because when I research something like delta, some places I research it say that delta has to do with a calm meditative state. And then my experience of it is my delta goes up when I'm doing problem solving and critical thinking. So it could be that the device itself accidentally mislabeled it, or that, different research shows different things. So that's something I'm still learning about, and I'm curious to connect more with a neuroscience community and to learn more about the brainwaves.
Interesting. Well, hopefully this could help you do that. We're Jason, kind of to get back to some of the nuts and bolts of this. When you are going to a show, I mean, some people think about this sort of music that it all has to be, pre-recorded and that it's all kind of manufactured. You never know where the sound comes from. But in this case, I mean, you go out and you do some of these performances, and all of the equipment is there, and you can see kind of how it works. So walk us through what that's like.
What is interesting in terms of my previous experience with doing music performances is that in the past, I knew exactly what was going to come out the speakers. And that's one of the things with making electronic music or techno is it can be a bit static. It's not like playing a live guitar or drums or some sort of brass section. And so I wanted to get closer to something that was more live and literally dependent on, what my brain, my body was doing in the moment. And so the process of putting on the EEG, the data that's going to come out, I can't hide it in any way, so if I'm feeling excited or nervous or scared, or if I'm able to get to a calm or meditative state, everyone in the room knows it. Whereas with traditional instruments, and particularly electronic music instruments, I can kind of hide behind the machine. And, as long as my hands are steady enough to turn the knobs or press the buttons, and, this would be in a traditional techno performance, no one knows what I'm feeling. And so for me, this was really a project in getting more vulnerable, using technology not to hide my humanity, but to amplify my humanity. Technically, the process is, I wear an EEG, and it looks like a headband. It goes across my forehead, and it transmits the activity of my brain via Bluetooth to an iPhone app that's in front of me, and that's an app I developed. And the app is where all the data is processed, and it converts. It's called data mapping. So it's taking a source, which would be my brainwave activity, and then mapping it to MIDI, which is musical instrument digital interface. And MIDI is a language that allows keyboards to talk to drum machines, to talk to sequencers. It's a language for electronic music instruments, and it can control tempo. It can tell when notes to play. It can do all sorts of control changes, so filters, effects, EQ, any sort of parameter that's on any of these machines can be controlled through MIDI. So in that data translation from my brain to MIDI, essentially what it's allowing you to do is I'm able to control these machines in front of me without touching them, simply by shifting my mental states. And then the sound comes out of the machines. And so just a quick review, the signal path is my brain, the EEG, the iPhone app, and then there's a MIDI cable that runs into the machines, and then coming out of the machines are the wires that go to the speakers. So that's the path from my brain to the audio that gets to the audience.
That is absolutely fascinating. I want to play a clip that you had sent us as an example of this. Now, this binary sequence is what you had sent, and this was a live performance, correct?
Mm-hmm.
It was. Okay, so let's. What I guess before I play it, what are people about to hear? Is it that straight setup, or were you experiencing something different at the time? Was this one of those, where you were more excited or less excited?
So you'll hear variations of it during it, and I can explain after. Near the beginning, you'll hear a dip in the acoustics, and so you'll hear a filter take place where it'll become more bassy and a bit more dreamy. That's my alpha wave going up, and so I remember that's kind of near the beginning of the clip. The tempo that you hear is being set by the overall activity level of my brain. In the future, I'm going to develop a system with an EKG where it's set by my heart instead.
Wow.
And so what you're hearing is you'll hear a rhythm, and the different percussive elements were inserted and placed by my brain going up and down through the alpha and delta ranges. And when it hits a certain point, it inserts a note. And then the overall atmosphere, which will be a synthesizer sound with, there's a reverb on it and a specific EQ, all of that is being set to moment based on my current brain state.
That is so fascinating. All right, here is a snippet of Binary Sequence by Jason Snell. So that's just a snippet of the beginning of this song. It's so interesting to imagine all that goes into that kind of driving beat as it goes along. Watching the waveform on the computer here was really interesting to see.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
That is so fascinating. So this journey that you've been on since developing some of this, it's taken you really all across the world, from the Midwest, around the U.S., overseas. You performed all across Europe and in different places. What ultimately brought you back to the Midwest?
One of the reasons I come back here regularly is this is the best place for me to do research and development. I'm able to really focus and get quiet, not be distracted by all the things that can come with travel or being in cities. And also, this is where I grew up. And so I grew up here. I went to school at Kirkwood and then the University of Iowa. And so a lot of the initial interest and grant funding that I've gotten for this have been through some institutions. Like at the University of Iowa, one of the first funders was the Stanley Museum, which was that's the new name for the University of Iowa Art Museum. And then also getting a tremendous amount of help from CSPS, which is an art hall here in Cedar Rapids. And then also Nubo Co., which is a STEM and STEAM nonprofit in Cedar Rapids. And this summer, I'll be doing a number of performances with Iowa City with a public arts grant that I got with them recently. So it's been nice to come back here and create the foundation of this system, which, I will start traveling with internationally in the future. But it's important to me for the roots of the project to be where my roots are.
Where do you want the project to go from here? Where do you envision it developing or going?
Each time that I dive back into the programming, I make the system more and more responsive to my brain at any given moment. One of the things that I'm also working on is expanding the sound library. And so in the course of a performance, I can move from sound kit to sound kit. Interestingly enough, by thinking left or thinking right, I'm able to do a crossfader. It's because the EEG is a headband and it's got sensors across the entire forehead. It can detect when I'm thinking to the left or thinking to the right based on the electricity coming out of my forehead into the sensors. And so the idea is to get to a longer form performance. The first performance I did was in Des Moines at Yellow Door Gallery, and I think it was about 15 minutes. And then my second performance was at the Feed Me Weird Things festival in Iowa City, and that one was closer to 20-25 minutes. So I want to build on the actual length of the performance and ideally get to a full performance length of 45 minutes to an hour. And then continuing to do those technological improvements where if different people put on the EEG that the system is very particularly responsive to what their particular state is in that moment. That's something that over time the system's getting more and more responsive as I improve it.
So we only have about a minute left here, but in that time, where can people go to find out more information or hear some of your music, or even maybe try to get involved with some of these projects?
Sure. My main artist website is jasonjsnell.com. So JSON middle initial J SNELL. And then this specific project is called Primary Assembly. And that is a name from DNA structures. That was part of the original creation of the project. So primary-assembly.com is another way to get to me.
All right. Well, we will put that link on our Facebook page where you can listen to this whole interview. So much that I'm not able to get to because of time. It's just an absolutely fascinating subject. But Jason Snell, I thank you so much for coming on and talking about this and letting us hear a little bit of this music. And I encourage people to go on and check out more.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, absolutely. Well, that just about does it for this week's episode of The Mind Boggles. I want to thank Jason Snell for coming on and talking to us, and thank you for listening, whether it is over the terrestrial airwaves or on our Facebook live stream at facebook.com/mindbogglesradio.